All right. Hey, everyone. So we're here for this short presentation on analytics for early stage startups. So during this presentation, I really want to cover what are some of the tools that you should be using if you're just getting started. Um, and I'll also define what I mean by early stage startup, but we're really looking at companies that have, less than 1,000 users, let's say mobile apps, or less than maybe low hundreds for B2B apps. And we'll cover this phase a little bit more. And at this stage, there's a lot of questions that tend to be more complicated compared to when you are much bigger stage. So let's get started. Now, one final thing is all the slides contain speaker notes with relevant links, so links to implementation and documentation and all that. So we can find a way to get these slides to you after the presentation. So to start, I'm Ruben, and I'm the founder of Practical Analytics, and we work primarily with venture-backed startups and help them set up the analytics foundation. So this companies tend to be in the low thousands of users, past the few hundred, and they're starting to ramp up. They're spending on paid channels like Facebook ads, Google ads, or even things like SEO or content marketing. I personally have a background as a front-end developer, and this is actually quite helpful since most of the analytics implementations have a very strong technical component to them to get them implemented. Um, and yet, the tools are used by marketers. So in any given company, there has to be this balance between the developers who implement them and the marketers who use them. So let's jump right in. So the problem. So the problem for early stage companies is, it's a simple question. Where do I start, right? What tools do I use? Should I implement this tool? What about that tool? They all seem so similar. And you really can't blame companies. So this is a company called Segment.com, which integrates with analytics tools, and we'll cover Segment briefly later on. But they have a list of about 50 tools on their page that they can send data to. And a lot of these 50 tools, they overlap in functionality and reporting. They are very similar, right? You might have popular things like Mixpanel, Kissmetrics, Amplitude, very, very similar, Google Analytics, Heap Analytics, and so on. So choosing among these tools is hard, especially if you've never done it before or if you don't have that kind of expertise. And this doesn't include data from other tools, like I say Facebook ads, which gives you some analytics data, or your email marketing tools, or your CRMs. So once you bring that in, there's a lot of data in a lot of different places, and trying to wrangle it together and use it can be tricky. So to help us figure out the right tools, we're going to look at some common star phases. And we really want the right tools at the right time. We can also expect our tools to change, so that the things that work right now will change once your team grows, or once you start spending more money, or once your user base grows. That's fine. So we'll be changing our tools, and we really want to find the ones that are relevant for us right now. So I really like this star phases framework that Brian Balfour created. And Brian is former VP of growth for HubSpot, and he has written a lot about growth on his blog, Co-Elevated. And this is one of those things. So he writes about three broad phases: traction, transition, and growth. And there's a lot of kind of shades that can happen within the stages, but we'll use them for our purposes here. So traction, you're looking for product market fit, you're focused on retention, you're experimenting with multiple channels, probably doing a lot of things that are likely not going to be uh, useful once you start growing, and you're really looking at the macro level. So you might be thinking in terms of product features, but you might not be segmenting or going that detail even into your data. And team-wise, you're looking at one or two people using the data, usually the founders, maybe a marketing person. And this is where we will be spending most of the time today, in the traction stage. I'll briefly cover transition and growth and show you what kind of tools become relevant at those stages. The type of companies that I work with personally tend to be in the transition stage, getting ready to go into the growth stage, which makes their needs a little bit different from our talk today. So the traction phase. In terms of users, again, we're looking at something below 1,000 users, maybe 100 users if you're B2B. But you're really looking at a small number of users, and you're growing those users, but it's still a low number. And this stage is all about having a low technical setup so you can experiment quickly. That's really what we're looking for in our analytics tools. Things are changing very quickly. We don't want to get locked in, or we don't want to spend months trying to get an analytics tool set up. So during this phase, this is some of the activities that you'll be doing that where data can help you, right? So you'll be experimenting with different marketing channels. So you want to know what channels are driving conversions, for example, right? Which channels are actually leading to signups. You'll be tweaking the product again at a macro level. What works, what doesn't. Looking for some of the best users, perhaps digging into some of those customer segments and trying to understand which ones tend to work better in terms of using the product, retention, and so on. Again, we're not doing a very complex analysis here. It's all very at the macro level. As we mentioned before, we'll be focused on retention, and even within the retention, it will be a very simple type of retention query that we'll be looking at. Are users staying on and using the product, right? You'll see that this retention queries can get quite complex later on as you try to understand the different aspects of your customer segment. And you'll have one or two, three people using your data, which means you don't really need a lot of dashboards or different accesses. A small group of people are using it. Now, in terms of tools, what I would recommend during this early stage is a couple tools, very straightforward, very broad tools. So first, we look at Google Analytics. Almost every website or almost every product has this installed. It's likely you might even have it installed yourself. And this is really the gold standard for analyzing marketing traffic, and it still is. And Google Analytics has a lot built into the tool. You can do a lot, and more importantly, you can do a lot out of the box. So the implementation is very straightforward, and you can start getting a lot of data very quickly. So this is number one. Number two will be a tool called Heap Analytics. This is a tool that's been going on for a few years now. And this is really a small dip into the event-driven world where you'll find other tools like Mixpanel or Kissmetrics. But what's nice about Heap is that just like Google Analytics, they built it on this concept of tracking everything, right? So once you install Heap, it automatically starts collecting everything the user does in your product. So the clicks, the form submissions, the pages they view, it all gets collected. So then you're able to go back retroactively and look at this, all these actions the user took. Again, from our framework, this is great because we'll be experimenting, so we might not really know what we want to track. So Heap just helps us avoid that by just simply collecting everything. In terms of performance, it's not really a major hit on performance to do this, but you can test this on your own app to confirm that. Finally, also Heap lets us do tracking of individual users by name or email, which is quite helpful. Again, we want to see who are those individual users that are doing well within our product. And that's something that Google Analytics doesn't let us do, just due to some terms of services limitations. So this will be the two major tools, and then we can supplement it with something like Google Sheets or Excel. And this will let us track more complex metrics, like to say CAC, cost to acquisition, or LTV, average revenue per user, and so on. A lot of these metrics, the formulas for those metrics aren't very complex, but getting the data you need for these metrics can be quite hard because they'll be coming from multiple sources. So organizing all the data from multiple sources in one way that you can even work with it, that can be complicated in the sense that will take time to get done. And at this stage, we don't want to spend a lot of time bringing data together that we don't really know if we'll need. So using something like Google Sheets will make it really easy to calculate those metrics and even track performance over time. So how are numbers changing from a week to week. So as I mentioned before, installing Google Analytics and Heap Analytics usually looks like this. You take the snippet they give you, and then you add it to your website or your app. If you're a mobile app, you'd be adding the SDKs into it. It's really as simple as it gets when it comes to analytics tools. And if you have, let's say, a custom platform like WordPress, Squarespace, maybe Shopify for an e-commerce company, there's likely plugins that make this even easier. At least for Google Analytics, Heap will always take a little bit more step. I included some links in the speaker notes for more information there if you want to dig into that. Now, what's interesting about Heap, for Google Analytics, we'll find that out of the box implementation will be good enough to do what we want to do with it. You likely will not have to do much on top of that. Maybe a couple minor things, but implementation wise, that will likely be it. Now, Heap, what makes Heap really great is the market they go after. So they really go after this a more non-technical market, or a market that doesn't want to spend a lot of development resources, getting tools set up. So once you install Heap, it'll start tracking data, and then they have something called an event visualizer, which looks like this. So you actually, you can then load your website once you have Heap installed, and then you can actually just click on things to track things, right? So I can click on that button, that download brochure button, and then Heap will tell me how many people did this recently. I'll give you the name, and I have a couple more options if I want to track other things. And all of a sudden now I define the event. So now I can see within Heap how many people click this button going forward. And because it retroactively captures data, we can see how many people did it in the past too. This same idea, this event visualizer, can be done for mobile apps. You can emulate your app and just go through your app and track the things that you're interested in seeing how users do. So this kind of retroactive data and this ability to track events without having to write a lot of code is really beneficial. And it's something that makes it really, really easy to test ideas, experiment, and go back and forth without really spending a lot of time. I find that for a lot of tools like Mixpanel, which is where I do a lot of my work, is we spend way more time planning things to make sure that we're tracking the right events. And there's downsides to that, and there's upsides for some of those tools. But Heap makes it really, really easy. And at this stage, when we want to experiment, this is great. To track some of the individual users, as I mentioned before, there'll be some extra setup that you have to do, but it'll be relatively also low, and you can work with a developer or your company to get that installed. So let's look at a few reports here to see what data we're actually looking at on a regular basis. So we'll start with Google Analytics, and in Google Analytics, really the main report we'll dig in and we'll use often will be an acquisition report. So this is a report that breaks down the traffic that our website got or our mobile app, and it compares it against a goal. So Google Analytics has goals that you can create, and a goal in this case can be something like a conversion, like someone signing up for your product. So you have to set this up, and then once you have it set up, then you can compare traffic against that goal. So you can see here, we can see, for example, organic search has a 5.5 conversion rate, and we see how many goal completions happen within this time period, 156. And we can now easily compare different traffic sources against a goal that matters to us, like conversion rate. So if you're doing a lot of experiments in bringing traffic to your site or your mobile app, now you have a sense of what's working in comparison to conversions. We can then dig into any of these traffic sources. For example, from the option before, we had social. We can click into that, and then Google Analytics breaks it apart and gives us the different social networks that are sending us traffic. And again, we see a conversion rate for each social network. And this is interesting because then we can start to look for opportunities, right? So we can see YouTube, for example, here has a relatively high conversion rate and quite a bit of goal completions compared to, say, Facebook, which has more traffic. So it could be interesting to explore why, what kind of traffic is coming from YouTube. So what kind of YouTube videos are bringing this traffic, and can we do anything else, right, to ramp that up and get more conversions and see how that conversion rate holds. So very simple reporting, very high level. You're just simply comparing different options and trying to understand where you should perhaps be spending more energy. There's a quick mention of UTM parameters in the first slide, and there's a guide on that. I won't go into complete detail, but this is the way of tagging your URLs, so you know where traffic came from, and tagging them is straightforward. But once you have this kind of tagging set up properly, and then you use it, let's say you're running Facebook ads and you tag all your Facebook ads with the right URLs, then Google Analytics can actually then break that apart, and you're able to see things like campaigns. Right? You're able to see how different campaigns perform from Facebook, or even how specific ads perform against a conversion. Same thing, against that same goal from before. So that kind of specificity can make it really clear. Can make it really clear where traffic is coming from and what traffic is really good for signups. One more report for Google Analytics, something that's very common. For example, look at the performance of mobile versus desktop versus tablet and the conversion rate for each. You usually find that for companies that design their websites for desktop, maybe responsive, but don't give mobile a focus, 100% focus, then you find their conversion rate for mobile it's usually lower than desktop. So this can give you some ideas of where you can improve things to bump up your conversion rate, right? Your number of signups. Now jump into Heap. So we really want Heap for a few things, and funnel analysis is one of them. Google Analytics is it's really great out of the box. As I mentioned, it has lots of things, and you can even do almost everything inside Google Analytics. One of its downsides is that it has really bad funnel analysis. And for product apps, we usually want very flexible funnels. So we might look at, we might have something like this, which is like the sign up funnel, right? Where people start the sign up page, then they sign up. We might go into detail to see how many people enter email and password. That may not be as useful. You might have a funnel for onboarding, right? Once someone signs up, they want to do 4 or 5 core actions, and then they're officially onboarded. And Heap will make this really easy to do. And once again, using the event visualizer, you define the different events or different actions that you want users to take, and then you can create a funnel like this, which is retroactive, and you can play around with it and so on. The second report that we want from Heap is retention tables. So this is a cohort analysis, and we simply look at some kind of start event. So for example, users will install the app, and then they come back and do some core action, right? Like start a new game, or perhaps they upload a picture, or whatever a core action is for your product. And then you see the retention, right? And like in week 1, how many users are who installed it, came back and did it, and week 2, and then week 3, and so on. And very high level of retention, and starts to give you an idea of what kind of drop off you're seeing from the users who you're converting, you're adding to your website. And finally, we have the individual users. So once we start to identify users by name or email, or perhaps something like database ID, then we can start to look at the different actions that individual user is doing, right? So we have a user here called Jeff, and we can see the different sessions that user had and the different actions they took. And the way you might use this report is you might be looking for very specific segments of users, right? Let's say we go back to that mobile example from before, and you had a mobile app, and you're looking at users who start new games. Perhaps you want to look at individual users who started more than 10 games, right? And now you have a list of names and emails of users who did that, right? Those might be the kind of users that you can then reach out to manually and talk to them. And you'll find that this kind of data can be done with, let's say, your database. So you could ask a developer to just give you some data from database. What Heap lets you do is it lets you run this analysis much faster, and without having to go through a developer or use SQL to do that. So now we have finally we have Google Sheets, and Google Sheets, Excel. Again, what we're looking here is some kind of weekly or monthly performance. If you're working on adding users, are you adding enough users on a weekly basis or monthly basis to hit your goals? And perhaps some of the more complex metrics like CAC, average revenue per user, and so on. And this data, this will be manually populated. What you might also find is once you have a very simple dashboard where you're tracking data on a weekly basis or monthly basis, once you have that and you've been working on that for a few months, that can be something that can be automated once you have that foundation. But then it's useful data because you've been using it for a while. So some of the mistakes that happen during this traction phase for companies. So the start is there's too many tools. So there's a lot of tools out there, and it's very easy to add tools, especially because tools that have very simple setups like Google Analytics and Heap, you just simply add the snippet and then you start tracking data. But you really want to try to avoid that. Like I said, something like Google Analytics can really give you a lot. You can even just use that tool and skip Heap altogether. But those two tools should give you everything you need at this stage, and then you go, you build on top of that. The second mistake is really a lack of enough data. Certain tools really require a certain minimum amount of data before they're useful. For example, A/B testing is one of those where if you don't have a lot of traffic, your A/B test will take a really long time. And yet you see startups doing it all the time. You might find also that certain things like Mixpanel, for example, has a new report where they help you correlate certain actions that your users do with retention, right? So how does action X correlate with fourth week retention? Really awesome report, but to do that, you need data to start, right? Number three, which is common for all companies at all levels, is just simply maintaining the accuracy of your data. So if you have something, if you're sending something with your product, and you got to make sure that every product release that data stays accurate. And finally, the Google Sheet example is one that I sometimes bring up with founders, and perhaps they don't want as much because they just want to automate a dashboard that updates in real time and looks at different date ranges, and you're able to segment in and do a bunch of stuff. That can all be done. It's all technically possible, but it takes time. So this automation too quickly, it's one of the things that really hurts startups. So let me briefly cover the transition stage and the growth stage. So in this stage, we're past the low thousands of users, and now we're spending money on paid channels. And paid channels doesn't just mean something like Facebook ads or something like Google ads. It might just mean you hire someone to do content marketing, right, or SEO. And at this stage, you're really working to set up an analytics foundation, and the data exploration will be coming from multiple team members. So a short reminder of what we got here. So we got now we're focused on macro and micro. We got to say one channel is working really well. We're ramping that up, and we have a team that's growing, and more people need access to the data now. So some of the tools that we see here, to start, we'll have a new tool here called Segment, segment.com. And Segment is a tool that lives on top of all your analytics tools. To understand why we need Segment, we actually have to go see the second tool here, say Mixpanel. So the second category here is Mixpanel, Amplitude, Kissmetrics, tools like Intercom sometimes fall into this category. And these are event-driven tools. Heap Analytics, to an extent, is event-driven. But what makes them special, what makes something like Mixpanel special, is that you want to usually plan out your implementation, right? So the ability to capture data and capture data for all time and then just go back retroactively and use it is not as good in Mixpanel. So we plan on the implementations, and we figure out what the actions we want to track, how we want to use them, and then we go and implement it. So the implementation of Mixpanel can be done directly with Mixpanel, but what you tend to quickly realize is that the data you send to Mixpanel is also really relevant to Intercom, which is used for messaging, like push notifications, SMS, and so on. And that same data might also be relevant for, let's say, Facebook ads, right? You can send events to Facebook ads to be used for conversion, and that data might be relevant to another tool. So the same data is relevant to 4, 5, 6 tools. So you can either integrate with each tool directly, or you can use segment.com as your one integration, right? So you send your data to segment.com, and then they'll translate it for you to Mixpanel or Intercom or Kissmetrics or whatever else. And that gives you flexibility when it comes time to switching tools. So let's say one day you no longer want to use Mixpanel, you want to move to Kissmetrics, you can do that by just kind of flipping the switch in the Segment dashboard, and without having to reintegrate with the tools. So it's very, very helpful, and it's something that it's becoming more and more common for companies that are growing quickly. Segment.com can also send the data to your own database, which becomes a question of data ownership, right? So if all your data is stuck in Mixpanel and you want to move away from Mixpanel, getting the data out is a bit of a pain. So Segment will help you send the data as soon as it happens, as the event kind of passes through Segment. It can also send it to a database, like a Postgres database or like an Amazon Redshift database, and then you can control it there. You might not do anything with it initially, but you can go back to it 6 months later, and then you'll know your data will be there. And that brings us to tool number 3 here, which is mode. What you start seeing is, for example, that simple dashboard that we had in Google Sheets. Now at this point, we can start automating that. But to automate that, we need to bring all the data that we need in one central place. And then we need to run queries on it, like, for example, like SQL queries. So something like Mode Analytics, which is a visualization tool based on SQL, can help us here. We still have something like Google Analytics. As I mentioned before, it really is the gold standard for analyzing marketing traffic, and it will work quite well up to, let's say, maybe 500,000 to 1 million visits a month. At that point, you might decide to buy Google Analytics, which there is a paid version, which is quite expensive. It's quite a big jump from the free tool to the paid version, which is 150,000 a year. But that might be worth it, depending on what you're doing with it. And then we also see a new category of tools here. For example, a tool called AppsFlyer, which is mobile attribution. The main aspect of why we add these tools at this point is specifically for mobile apps. So if you're a mobile app, let's say a mobile game, and you're starting to ramp up paid acquisition, like Facebook ads or Google ads or other advertising networks, one of the things you'll quickly realize or notice is that the app stores don't give you a lot of data on where installs are coming from. So that installs can be kind of segmented under organic or not properly labeled, and it becomes almost like this black box. So tools like AppsFlyer come in, you add them to your app, and then they can break apart this black box and tell you what's really driving installs. Again, this tool makes sense once you start paying for traffic, because tools like AppsFlyer, you tend to usually pay them based on install. So you're driving thousands of installs, and you really want to know what channels drove those installs. Finally, we have the stage of growth. At this stage, you're not really breaking apart into dedicated marketing teams. You have a complex analysis of different metrics, and you're really focused on the micro. And at this stage, you really go custom, and this might change depending on what your team needs. But you tend to see teams move away completely from things like Mixpanel or anything else, and they just completely use something like Mode, right? So they run all their data off SQL. So they simply have a way, like segment.com, to funnel data into one single place, and then use SQL to run all your analysis and reports. That tends to be the most flexible option. It tends to be time consuming, because you need someone in your team who can do SQL, and say most marketers still might not be able to do SQL, right? It's still a technical skill. But at this point, you might have a dedicated person who's just dedicated for that, or even a dedicated team. So, and within this team or this person will really decide what they need for this team. So you might keep Mixpanel because it's simple. You might not, right? So it's really a very custom stage here. Perfect. So that's all I have. And I know we can open the floor to some Q&A if anyone has any questions.